Kate Falcha. Welcome back to Irish Granny Helen. This is our video number 4 Saturday book, Final Event by Nick Redfern. You might have just watched number 3. Numbers 1 and 2 were the previous weekend. And we're making our way through this really interesting book. And I'm going to give you a little preview, surprise. I spoke with Paul Wallace a little bit about this book. And if you haven't watched my conversation with Paul Wallace and you're into this book by Nick Redfern, you might want to listen to what Paul Wallace has to say. He has a very different take on it. Depending on where you stand on the topic, it may or may not make you feel better. And I'm going to be doing a conversation between Denise Siegel and Deborah from the Cosmic Fold and me. The three of us are going to have an in-depth discussion of this book as soon as we all get finished reading it. I only have 30 pages to go, but I have enough pages to do this video number 4, so let's get started. We're on chapter 17, I Dreamed That I Was Dead in Bed. Name of the chapter. I'm not telling you anything. It's the name of the chapter. So this is the narration in the book. Perhaps I don't mention this enough. Let me say so now. There are a number of places in the book where there are documents, and he makes reference to the documents, and I may synopsize or repeat his synopsis or conclusion about the documents, this bold print, for example, without actually reading you the whole document, because they're military speak and they're full of military acronyms and lieutenant, general, major, colonel, whatever. So I'm condensing it for the sake of brevity. So this is a notable UFO encounter that happened on October 18th, 1973 at 11 p.m. The prime witness was a U.S. Army Reserve person in a helicopter going to Cleveland Hopkins Airport. Now, they love it when it's a military person, and they love it when it's a pilot, because that gives it a little more legitimacy. He's Captain L. Coyne and Sergeant J. Healy, who was the flight medic on the helicopter, First Lieutenant A. Jezzy, who was a chemical engineer, and Sergeant Janacek, a computer tech. So all kinds of sciencey, practical, not given to a lot of imaginative storytelling. 10 miles out from Mansfield, they saw, this is in that area as a city, they saw a single red light in the west moving slowly to the south. And at first, they thought, okay, is this an F-100 around Mansfield, in the sky over Mansfield? I'm assuming an F-100 is some kind of plane. And they were keeping an eye on it. They caught it early, kept an eye on it. But then it started to approach them. When you're up in the sky in a plane, you really don't want anybody to be approaching you. Captain Coyne, he did a descent to 500 feet, but he lost radio contact. It's like everything inside the helicopter shut down. He couldn't talk to the Mansfield Tower. The VHF radio went dead. They got scared they were going to have a head-on mid-air collision. But then that red light that was approaching them stopped, still in the air, and hovered. And it was close enough to tell that it really wasn't a light. They could now make out the shape of this object. It was a cigar-shaped, large, gray vehicle with a dome and what looked like windows around the dome. The red light happened to be on the front, like the nose of the thing. Suddenly, a green pyramid-shaped shaft of light came out of it and covered the entire helicopter, filled it up with light, went into the windshield, covered it with light, but extended around the whole outside body of the helicopter. And it was an eerie green shade, and then shot this beam, and then it shot off into the sky towards Lake Erie. Well, the helicopter was still in gear to descend, but it was they were shocked. The pilot was shocked to find out that even though it was mechanically programmed, I don't know the right word, I don't fly, it was they had it ready to go down. They were making it go down, but it wasn't going down. It was climbing at 1,000 feet a minute. It reached 3,800 feet before the captain was able to actually make the controls respond. The radio returned, so they went on to Cleveland Hopkins Airport. And while this was happening, meanwhile, there was a UFO investigator from Columbus, Ohio. Oh, more than one. William Jones, Warren Nicholson. They were able to find 5 eyewitnesses who saw this object near the Charles Mill Reservoir while this pilot was calling in and talking, and they were watching. 5 other people saw this thing. They were in a car together, and they were driving south from Mansfield. They were going to their rural home. This is what they said, a brief description. It was like a blimp. It was as big as a school bus. One said it was kind of pear-shaped. They saw the green light on the helicopter. They said it was like rays. The helicopter, the trees, the road, the car, everything turned green. The UFO skeptic named Philip Klass said, "Oh, nothing to see here, folks. Move along. The crew just got spooked by a meteor shower from Orion." These are experienced military pilots. All conventional craft were ruled out. This particular incident, they keep them organized, and it's rated as high strangeness after having done extensive investigative analysis. After this event, Captain Coyne started getting calls from representatives of the Department of the Army, from the Office of the Surgeon General, asking, "Have you had any unusual dreams?" And he had a vivid near-death experience. And Healy, the other guy on the helicopter, also started getting calls, these from the Pentagon, asking, "Has anything like this happened since? Have you dreamed of being out of your body?" And he said, "Well, funny you should ask, because yes, I have." And he tells this story. He said, in the 2 instances that he recalled, what they questioned me was, number 1, have I ever dreamed of body separation? And I have, he said. I dreamed that I was dead in bed and that my spirit or whatever was floating, looking down at me, lying dead in bed. And the other thing was that had I ever dreamed of anything spherical in shape, which definitely had not occurred to him. So first answer was yes, second answer was no. The Surgeon General office had been investigating near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences and the death and the afterlife in the early 70s. That's kind of an interesting thing for the Surgeon General to be studying. For example, in 1975, they put forward a document named Soviet and Czechoslovakian Parapsychology Research from the Defense Intelligence Agency, and it discusses out-of-body studies in Soviet Union. In 71, a guy called Ostrander and another guy called Schroeder wrote Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain. It also included Soviet studies of death experiences of animals, and they described some really grim experiments, and I'm not going to go there. It doesn't advance the narrative of the book at all, in my opinion. did show measurable neurological reaction at a distance in response to the death of one animal and then another still alive, very far away, the other, uh, like animals A and B. In 2008, Redfern was told about work in this area and consults with the Collins elite about parapsychology, alien abduction, and Judgment Day. And this had strongly affected the elite and the army. Chapter 18, out-of-body abductions. So the army and the elite were both investigating that topic of abductions at the same time, unbeknownst to each other. 7 members of the elite happened to be in the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. So a lot of these clandestine studies were happening right under the noses of other military personnel who were not clued into it. Before he ever spoke with, I believe his first name was Ray Boesch. We talked about him before. Manners, or Duke, those 3, before he talked to either of those 3, kind of informant whistleblowers, secretly guys that came to Redfern. Redfern met Tammy Stone. And her claims that she had made, that she's the girl who was in the car, I think. I've read so many of these stories now, I've forgotten half of them. Her claims were later vindicated by deep throats in the elite. In other words, whistleblowers in the elite. Her story, maybe I haven't told you this story yet. I read so much about it in reference to it towards the end of the book that I can't remember what I've spoken out loud and what I've actually read and not talked to anybody about. Her story is at the age of 24, on a night in March of 1973, she was in Waco. She was driving and she was abducted by aliens and subsequently contacted by government agents, and her family continued to be surveilled. So she was a waitress on a late night shift, and she worked 30 miles from Waco, which seems an awfully long way to go for a waitress job. But anyway, 60-mile round trip every day to be a waitress, that's incredible. The gas, gas was comparatively cheaper in 73. So she was 30 miles from Waco, 2 a.m., because she'd worked the night shift, driving towards the city of Waco. And she was within 15 minutes of getting home, and she was the only one on the road, a very rural road. She started to feel really strange, like she was drugged or dreaming. Her ears hurt. Sound became muffled. She developed violent vertigo and accompanying nausea. She kept driving, because that sounds like a good idea. She kept driving and saw a sudden bright glow that enveloped her car. The engine and lights went out. She felt a sharp, intense pain throughout her body. Car came to a screeching halt. And in a pasture right by where the car stopped on the right, she saw a small object with a pale pink dome, and 2 small humanoids had exited and were approaching her. She was groggy and felt like she wanted to vomit. She tried to get out and run away, but she couldn't. As they got closer, she got weaker, and then she became unresponsive. Next thing she knew, it was dawn, and she was sitting in the passenger seat, not the driver's seat. She was scared and confused. She raced home, took a long bath, and slept until 9 o'clock that night. She had fragments of memory about it. She told nobody. She must have lived alone, is all I can figure. She told nobody. The next few nights, she had vivid and disturbing dreams, those dreams filled in part of her broken memory that she couldn't access. The dreams were always the same. This is what she dreamed over and over. The humanoids were about 5 feet tall, very thin faces. They wore light blue, one-piece uniforms, like jumpsuits with fitted caps. They dragged her out of the car. More showed up and helped to carry her into the UFO. Then she was naked on an exam table, and then she goes in to describe procedures, and we all know these stories. We've heard them a million times. Not well known at the time, but now they are. There was a machine like a big eye that hummed, and it hovered over her. She felt sick. They dressed her, put her back in the car. In the driver's seat, there was a human in a military outfit. So these beings put her back in the wrong seat, the passenger seat. But in her car, sitting in the driver's seat, was a young guy in a military outfit who looked really, really scared and was having a panic attack. And the dream ended. For the next 3 or 4 weeks, she began to have apocalyptic dreams and nightmares. I think those are probably the same thing, but she saw a near future with the earth in ruins, localized atomic exchanges, pollution, overpopulation, starvation. Okay, now I want to be really clear for the sake of YouTube that this is somebody telling the story of a nightmare that she had. I'm not discussing anything real. This is a dream that we're discussing. This young woman, Tammy, had this dream. She dreamt of a manufactured lethal virus that laid waste to the Middle East and then spread globally. This is a dream. It's not real. I'm not advocating or saying this is fact. Merely repeating it's a dream. And then she saw a disturbing afterlife with several types of grays feeding on human souls. And she said, it's like I was flying over the planet watching everything, but I wasn't in my body. Weeks later, a guy in a brown suit, kind of like a Marine, kind of unemotional, showed up at her door, said he was doing a survey for local cops about car crimes in the area. She said she was really uncomfortable and she didn't let him in. She answered questions at the door. She used that age-old security method of keeping her foot on the door. That was really adequate. He asked her point blank, have you ever been concerned about being kidnapped out of your car? She slammed the door at that point and yelled, I'm calling the cops. She began having strange visitors, 2 guys that were obviously in the military, but not in uniform. So I don't know how she knew. From Kirkland Air Force Base in New Mexico. They must have told her, I guess. Sometimes some of these stories in this book lack details that really make the whole narrative clear. They must have presented themselves as from Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico. Remember, she was in Waco in Texas. They apologized for the first guy, the guy in the brown suit that scared her. Shockingly, they knew all the details of her abduction. Why she did this, I don't know, but she agreed to discuss it with them. And let's see what they had to say. They told her things that were startling and disturbing. Over the course of the previous 2 decades, she was quietly informed, sporadic reports had reached officials that suggested human beings around the entire planet had been kidnapped by otherworldly entities for purposes suspected but never entirely proven. They added, however, that in 1971, such kidnappings had begun to increase at truly alarming rates, and particularly so in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Nevada. She said they never mentioned the word abductions like you hear today. They called it kidnappings. Once again, for the sake of YouTube, I'm not advocating any of this as the truth. This is a story from a book. They told her that she could help profound national security issues involved by answering their questions. She said, yes, what else should I have done? And with her consent, the pair reeled off a number of really strange questions. Since the kidnapping, had she felt the urge to be a vegetarian? Was she before or since the apparent UFO encounter an adherent of Buddhist teachings? Did she, prior to her experience, believe in life after death? And had her views on the subject changed since the encounter on that lonely stretch of road? And most disturbing of all, was she of the opinion that after death we would all be judged by a higher power? Seems like pretty normal questions for the Air Force to be asking a complete stranger. They told her there had been other victims who had the same dreams, and some Air Force people thought that ETs were flesh and blood, and others said that they were demonic beings. They told her this. The connection to the realm of the dead and the afterlife was in the demonic theory, that they got sustenance from souls. Now, this is what the Collins elite people believed. And I will just throw in here as an aside my own recollection of Lou Elizondo, who was involved in government investigations of UFOs for a very long time. He said someplace in his book that there is a subset in the military and in national intelligence who are fundamentalists and who believe that these are demons coming from their own particular religious context. I just feel like I should mention that. You know, what story you hear depends on who is telling the story. It's interesting to hear Paul Wallace's perspective from his worldview and context. Senior figures in U.S. intelligence feared the ETs were manipulating, infiltrating human society. They were kidnapping and programming people for future tasks on behalf of the Antichrist, is what these guys believed. The ultimate goal was to bring about Armageddon disguised as UFOs in order to feast on souls from the resulting nuclear holocaust. This is what this group of military people believed. Then I thought this was really interesting. Now, none of these are my words. I'm just telling you what the book said, that they had kidnapped political figures who came back to speak of apocalyptic end of the world events and the need to attack Russia soon. Now, remember, this is the 1970s. So the USSR is still going strong, still the Cold War. Nuclear arms race, all that stuff that was going on. And once again, not my words, this is a story. The aliens were engineering World War III to have a huge, I don't know what else to call it, but a soul feeding. Stone, the young woman, was asked to take a physical and she said yes. They came back twice more and asked her more questions about things like life after death for animals, but the physical never happened. At the last visit, they brought this girl is really naive. I can't believe this. They brought a pie from the store as a gift, and she was very flattered. And they made her eat some, like they encouraged, oh, try it, you'll like it. They didn't want any. It was for you. It's a gift. She ate some, and after they left, she felt odd. She felt euphoric, reckless, and invulnerable. She got in her car, didn't know why, didn't know where she was going, got on the highway and felt more and more out of reality, and became overcome by an urge to floor it and go into oncoming traffic. She had to fight this urge over and over, but by strength of will, she was able to. She realized she must have been drugged, and she must be a risk for the government. Her mother got a call while she's in the car struggling not to do that. Her mother got a call that Stone had been in an accident. And so she felt really lucky that she'd been able to resist the urge to create this accident. In a declassified document from September of 1973, 3 days after her experience, Sergeant Stigliano from the U.S. Air Force Recruitment Office in Waco told the San Antonio FBI that someone had called Waco called the newspaper of Waco at night to ask about UFOs over Waco. The caller said that he was a U.S. Air Force captain, that he had a top secret folder with photos of military installations, but he didn't elaborate on what was actually in these photographs. The guy was trying to get more information from the paper, and the question that Redfern asks in the book is, was this guy that made that phone call, was he one of Stone's visitors? What's, very confusing. What's going on here? 2 months later, outside of Houston, May 23rd, 73. So I think I wrote that date wrong. The phone call that was made 3 days after Tammy Stone's near accident. I wrote 9/73. I think it was March 9th of 73. So I apologize for that. 2 months later, now we're in May of 73. Outside Houston, a girl named Judy Doherty was in the car, a woman, with her daughter, her mother, her sister, and her brother-in-law driving somewhere. And they saw a bright light following in the sky, pacing them in the sky, and all the way home. And it got closer as they arrived home. And as they got to their house, other people, family members, must have been a big family members that were inside the house came out to check out this light because they saw it too. They all saw a disc-shaped object with rows of windows floating silently, just hovering silently. Then all of a sudden it shot up and away very, very fast. That's what the UFO I saw did. I just couldn't see what it was because it was so far away. We thought it was a satellite. Didn't act like a satellite. Anyway, since then, Judy was having dreams and nightmares and stressed out all the time. No one else in the family did, but they saw what everyone saw. She was the only one who got out of the car to look closer at it before getting home. So that's the part of the story that she didn't really remember, and that's why it's being tacked on here at the end. When the full story came out, and there a carload of people driving home and they see the light, before they got home, she stopped and she got out of the car to check it out. Then all of a sudden they are driving back to the house. It's still following. Everyone in the house comes out. They all look at it and it flies away. She kind of conveniently forgot the part where she got out. March 13th of 1980, she had hypnosis induced for her by Dr. Leo Sprinkle. And this is the story that she told in the trance. She actually saw a small animal being taken up by the light from this thing, squirming to get free. And it seems that this is what she saw when she got out of the car. It was being beamed up to the saucer before she ever got to her house. She remembered she didn't go up in the craft, but when she was outside, and this is so interesting, when she was outside the car, approaching it a little closer, looking at it, watching this small animal, she felt a sense of bilocation. She was in the craft and she was standing by the car at the same time. In the margin, I wrote WTF. So she said the small animal was a calf. And it was dissected and dropped out of the craft. Her daughter was taken and examined and returned to the car. They drove home. They were followed by a blob of light. At the house, it swooped down and seen as a UFO by everybody who observed it. And then it zipped off, but it lingered in the sky for a while, kind of hovering before it zipped off. Now we have another story. May 5th of 1980, Myrna Hansen in Eagles Nest, New Mexico. This is, I guess, a town. She was driving home from Oklahoma with her young son in the car. Under hypnosis, she talked about being taken into a UFO, subjected to examinations, seeing a cow pulled up on a beam, and Now, none of this is my word. None of these are my words. This is a story being told by this woman in this book. She saw the cow being pulled up in a beam, and she was taken to an underground base where she saw body parts floating in vats. She was implanted to monitor and control her thoughts. This is what she reported. I don't know if this really happened. This is just what she said. Who knows? Kirtland Air Force Base Security recognized her description of a fortified section of their airbase, Monzano Weapons Storage Complex, the largest repository of nuclear weapons in the Western world. Great. The Air Force took her story seriously. She was hypnotized by an Air Force psychologist, and she could even describe the very distinctive elevators underground in the base. So, trying to not jump to conclusions, in the book, Redfern asks, was she an accidental remote viewer in an altered state? The Air Force was concerned. Her experience confirms official interest in alien abductions by Kirtland Air Force Base personnel. It confirms parallel things to Judy's story, like her life force being detached from her body and transported to other locations, and the UFOs having beings in them. Are they hungry demons? Chapter 19, Project Abduction. So Manners arranged for Redfern, the author, to meet a guy called Dr. Mandor. And Redfern describes him as the creepiest individual I have ever personally encountered. In 2009, he met at Mandor's house, as he described it, filthy, rundown house, full of depictions of jinns from the Quran, beings made of smokeless fire, some benevolent, some not. It's where the word genie comes from. Dr. Mandor, he said, was quite paranoid and reminded him a little bit, this is a nightmare, of Henry Kissinger. The only non-American in the elite, and he was in charge of the elite's sub-project in the early 80s that were looking at abductions. That's why Redfern is speaking with him. He told Redfern that the elite were doing a clandestine study of abductees with occasional home visits to those trusted not to talk outside the little circle. There was some phone monitoring, letter interception, some physical surveillance at night, and a growing number of abductees reported secret military surveillance, including harassment by low-flying black helicopters, interrogation by senior military people, kidnapping to underground facilities with black-eyed ETs and human military personnel working together. And there's the famous case of Betty Andreasen. I did her book ages and ages and ages ago. She was under surveillance for years, and it increased when Fowler, the author John Fowler, worked on his book, The Andreasen Affair, Phase 2. There were black helicopters hovering 100 feet over their house for ages, like not going anywhere, just hovering. They had no marks on them. The windows were blacked out. You couldn't see who was operating them. Her husband took more than 200 photos of these things. They wrote a complaint to the Army. To the adjutant general, demanding an answer as to why he and Betty were apparently being subjected to low-level and repeated visitations by the mystery helicopters. The only response came from the Army's adjutant general, Major General John F. Gore, who said, quote, "It's difficult to determine what particular aircraft is involved or the owning unit." That gives you faith. Then there's the abductee Debbie Jordan, who claimed a genetic link for the abductions, a genetic reason for the abductions. She underwent long harassment and helicopter presence. She said she couldn't hide. There's nowhere to hide. They were every day over her house, hovering 60 to 90 feet above the house. She said you can't see through the blacked out glass. You don't know who's driving them. They're unmarked. Then there's Melissa Leslie, who since 1993, her abduction was followed up by the U.S. military. She felt she was kidnapped and drugged by two guys wearing camouflage, taken to a military facility, interrogated about her abduction and the ET technology she may have seen. She was told, "You were not theirs, you were ours," by the military guys. She saw large unmarked helicopters at the facility. Casey Turner, who was the late Carla Turner's husband. Carla Turner was a famous early speaker about this stuff. Her husband Casey was drugged and taken to an underground installation and interrogated by military personnel. He saw other people there who were drugged for interrogation, sitting in a daze. He vaguely remembers an officer that got angry with him because he wasn't cooperating. The investigator, author Gray Bishop, wrote this: "Every piece of mail he ever got from Carla Turner had been tampered with, and it seemed was obviously on purpose. It wasn't trying to be hidden," as kind of a warning to both of them. There are officials, therefore, you can make the assumption that there are officials who are interested in ET abduction, and their interest is organized and it involves a lot of money. Another theory is that there are no real ETs, that all of this is just military. They're using a scenario, kind of imposing the scenario for testing new technology and mind-controlled drugs, that it's a sophisticated hypnosis sort of technique, and they're using citizens as guinea pigs. In other words, the people do legitimately think that what they report they're seeing are real, but they are under the influence of some aspect of mind controlled on the part of the military. So hypnosis or drugs or whatever. And these are all theories. I'm not purporting that any of this is true. Allison, age 41, from Sedona area of Arizona. From the age of 27 to 31, she experienced at least 5 abductions. She was sitting in her living room and her dogs began to pace and whimper, and suddenly everything became a blur. She later found herself in a different part of the house, groggy with a headache and a very dry mouth. And for days after, she had recurring dreams about what had happened. She dreamed at the beginning of the event, the whole electrical stuff in her house went out, and there were humming noises from outside. An intense bright light shone into her room, and she became semi-conscious. She saw small beings who carried her out to a craft. She was subjected to a physical exam and a nasal probe, and put back in the wrong room. The UFO left and the hum stopped. On visit number 5, the hum stopped seconds after the ETs entered, as though like it wasn't supposed to stop, but it accidentally did. She came back to consciousness and regained her senses, no longer felt disoriented. Immediately, the ETs vanished, and in their place were big human guys, beefy guys in black combat fatigues. One guy was screaming into a mic, "What happened?" Blah, blah, blah. And the guys started to back away from her, and one of them gestured to her, "Stay there," and "I'm sorry." And she saw them get in an unmarked helicopter and fly off. They had a powerful lamp that they had shined on her property, which is a very secluded ranch. She had no neighbors. Allison today believes that that the military did it using subliminal hypnosis and mind-altering techniques, and maybe some non-lethal technology to disable her central nervous system and her body movement, made her think that she was an ET abductee, but she really wasn't. This is her assumption now. She was really a guinea pig for testing sophisticated weaponry to affect and manipulate the mind and body. So in other words, the military had these new inventions and they needed to test them, and this was how they did it. The researcher Helmut Lamner says that he can divide all of this up into three groups. There's the first group is the military. They're interested in advanced mind and behavior control. This is a very similar sort of program to MK Ultra. The second group is a separate group doing biogenetic research. And the third group is gathering information about UFOs and ETs that probably do exist. And it seems like some kind of military who do believe in the UFO ET abduction. And they have this whole thing that is done by this third group is because they feel that there is national security threat, implications for national security. By 1982, the elite began making waves within the government. They wanted to know why a group had access to military helicopters, military underground installations, and more, but the elite had access to nothing, to no resources. And they were feeling a little bit left out, I guess. Chapter 20, Reagan's Doomsday White House. So Dr. Mandor told this to Redfern. On June 27th, 1982, Ronald Reagan invited Steven Spielberg, a total of 35 guests, including Sandra Day O'Connor, to the White House to screen the movie E.T. So they watched this movie. They're all sitting watching the movie. When it was over, Reagan turned to Spielberg and quietly said, "You know, there are not 6 people in this room who know how true that really is," meaning the movie. So in 74, before the movie, 74, Reagan had a UFO encounter, and that's why he was so interested. And he did a classified briefing the day after he watched this movie, E.T. In 1982, he started a secret study into large-scale kidnappings of Americans by aliens. And the reports were to go directly to Reagan, James Baker, and Deputy Chief of Staff Michael Deaver. They called themselves the Troika. Troika is a Russian carriage with three wheels, I think. 3 horses. I can't remember. The Collins elite was doing part of the investigation, and they submitted a report to the Reagan study about the theory of demons and fallen angels. The elite warned, "Do not be seduced by satanic deception." The CIA did a Science and Technology Division report that there was a vast ET operation with a genetic agenda, as described by Bud Hopkins in his book, with Missing Time, the book called Missing Time, and also Fuller's book, The Interrupted Journey, about Betty and Barney Hill. Then there was a third report from the U.S. Air Force psychologist who said alien abductions are the work of the human subconscious and sleep disorders related to cultural beliefs and folklore. Now, the book Missing Time by Bud Hopkins was the turning point in public awareness of alien abductions. It's got a number of case studies that Hopkins investigated himself. He said that aliens, I should preface this by saying Hopkins was a very well-known artist. I didn't know this for the longest time. I thought he was well known for his alien work. He was a well-known artist, and he had an experience, or witnessed an experience, and became very much an activist researcher and wrote books about it and stuff. He later had a relationship and lived for years with Leslie Kane, the woman who wrote, the journalist from New York Times, who wrote Generals, UFO, pilots, generals, and astronauts talk about UFOs. It's a really good book. She later went on, because of all of this and because of their connection to spiritual issues, she and Bud had an agreement to get in contact with each other after one died. He died, and she talks about what happened. They made a documentary, a multi-episodic documentary out of it called Life After Death. And I think it's on Prime or Netflix. It's really interesting, but it's a good book. You should read the book. Anyway, Bud wrote this book, Missing Time, talking about alien abduction, brought it to the attention of the general public. He said aliens, at least one race of them, were abducting humans and doing covert genetic operations to create hybrids because the ETs were on an evolutionary or genetic decline, and they needed that DNA. UFO researcher Brian Parks may have known of these reports that went to Reagan, the three reports I just described: the demonic, the purely scientific, and then the threat to national security. So these reports went to Reagan, and this researcher, Brian Parker, kind of knew about them. And he told Redfern that there was a secret study of cases in missing time, and that the official study all went to Reagan in the White House. The officials kept the secrets because they feared exposure. They didn't want people to know that Ronald Reagan was sitting around reading about UFOs. Critics in the military intelligence were up against the Christian fundamentalists, not like the elites, who didn't want the government involved in psychic phenomenon at all. They didn't want them to study this from that direction because, the devil was demonic. Reagan liked the elite theory, of course, best because he was into end times theology. He had this doomsday belief. He brought with him all these books to the White House, which, try to imagine that happening today. Why don't you? See Dick run. Okay, so he brought Bible books. He brought preaching by Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, Jimmy Swaggart, the Hal Lindsey book, The Late Great Planet Earth, and Reagan's involvement in the world of astrology, which many believe was demonic and should not have been engaged in the White House. So interesting things happening in those days. He had this astrologer, Joan Quigley. Nancy brought her in. She said, after Reagan was shot, Nancy said, I would do anything to protect him. And Quigley eventually wrote a book called What Does Joan Say? And she said, not since the days of the Roman emperors and never in the history of the United States presidency has an astrologer played such a significant role in the nation's affairs of state. So all of this was revealed by Don Regan, no relation, after he resigned in 1987 because he was so disgusted by the whole Iran-Contra affair. Reagan agreed to increase the black budget money and expand the scope for the elite to study the demons, that they were able to investigate top secret groups within the military responsible for the surveillance of abductees. So now the elite's getting some bucks from old Ronnie. They found no evidence of such a surveillance group, no project of surveillance, no black helicopters, no basis in reality for any of these stories. Allegedly. The elite concluded that the helicopters, the military interrogators, the alien human underground labs must be hallucinations, sophisticated imagery generated by demons and fallen angels and projected into the minds of abductees while they slept. It was done to reinforce the deception that UFO's presence was ETs, and government secretly knew that okay, they were UFOs and ETs are real, but it was really demons. That's what they're getting at. That it was all a fantastic mirage and there was no basis in physical reality. It was solely mental illusion controlled and created by demons. This is what the elite is telling the president. Fallen angels are deceiving the human minds. People in official positions who have Christian backgrounds focused on this, seriously believe this. In their book on Unmasking the Enemy, Dr. Nelson Pacheco, scientist with the Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Powers in Europe, and Tommy Bland, a now retired Air Force employee, they said, we propose that the reality behind the UFO phenomenon is due to a manifestation of non-human preternatural consciousness for the purpose of deception that can interact with our physical environment and our human consciousness to produce visual, physical, and psychological effects. The artificial construct created by these mimics our three-dimensional objects and systems and even our religious imagery, the purpose being to slowly condition our minds through subtle deception to accept a false belief while undermining our rational thought processes and our human spirit. See here. So in the book, The Bible, Physics, and the Abilities of Fallen Angels by Nicole Malone, she agreed, called the military abductions were carried out by fallen angels. And there are some genuine military investigations that go on, but the MILABs are one type of alien abduction, which is a mental attack vision, and therefore reality in general is not at all what it seems to be. So that's the end of that chapter, and I think we'll end here before we get into the next chapter. So this is the end of video 4. Wild story, very wild, very interesting. I'm so curious to see everybody's reaction to this. So definitely let me know what you think, if you enjoy the book or whatever, and sleep well. Slangufoil, slancha.